Hello and welcome back to my channel. Last week I released the first part to my thoughts of the perspective and just the things that I learned from reading through the entire Bible in a month, which was a fun experience, like truly enjoyable. So here we are to record part 2, and I think like 2 more things that I was going to talk about. One of them was the faithless character of man, just that we are so fallen and like so short-sighted, and our faith and our obedience is so temporary. Like I see, the covenant love of God played out across centuries and millennia of his promised faithfulness. Like he's made some covenants where it was literally just like, I'm going to do this thing for you. But then he did some things like, if you do this, I will do this. If you don't do it, this is what the consequences are going to be. And to see how short a time people could hold up their tiny end of the bargain. I feel like God always placed the heavier end of the burden on himself, and yet even with that, like, it wasn't enough. Like, we couldn't even keep to some kind of semblance of following God, and just completely threw everything out the window so quickly. Like the generation of Israelites that saw everything that God did for them in Egypt, and then doubted so many times throughout their journey in the wilderness, and then doubted that he could bring them into the promised land that he'd been leading them towards all this time. And so they had to wander in the desert for 40 years. Like, that generation that God originally made the covenant with couldn't even follow it through to the end of their lifetime. So then it starts over, fresh start. The children, they get God's law, and they get to inherit the promised land, and they get to start driving out these people. And like so quickly, they're like, oh, look at all these other gods. Oh, look at all these other foreign women that God told us not to marry because they would turn our hearts away and get us to worship their gods. Maybe that's not so bad. Maybe their gods are pretty cool. Maybe their gods are great. Maybe their gods are just as good as the one who brought us up out of Egypt and made his dwelling place among us and said that he would go with us and make us his people and do all these good things for us if we would just follow him. Maybe we don't want to follow him. And just so quickly, like, the turnover is sad. Just to see, like, they couldn't keep it up for what felt like even 2 generations in a row. To the point where when you're reading through the list of all of the kings, like, all the Israelite kings, they were off. They were just kind of hopeless. And in Judah, every now and then you would get this one good king. And sometimes there would be a few in a row, but progressively they got more and more like, is he really following God's covenant? Is he actually a good king? I don't know. He kind of started off okay and then sort of went downhill at the end of his life. Literally even Solomon, David's son, started out like, oh my gosh, he's going to be great. He's like literally typified something as Jesus. His coronation moment is so clearly reminiscent of the triumphal entry. And then he like falls away. By the end of his lifetime, God has removed his favor from him so much that he's like taking the kingdom from him. He was like, you know what? You only get Judah and everybody else, I'm choosing a new king. But anyway, so all the Israelite kings were terrible, and the kings of Judah, some were good, and then their son was awful and completely did not do the good things that God told them to do, even though hopefully their father tried to raise them to follow the good things and said, hey, look at this difference between me and what God's doing for me and the ways that he interacts with me because I'm trying to follow his laws, and all that king of Israel over there and what's happening to him and the way his country is going, because he's not listening to God and not following God and completely rejecting God. And yet the sons would still just be like completely wicked. And you're just like, what? Can we not stay faithful even for one generation? Which, first of all, like, challenges me to not just assume that someone's gonna be a Christian or follow God just because their parents did, or assume that I'm gonna turn out okay because my parents were Christians, or that because my grandma took me to church sometimes when I was little and I know about God, like, I'm gonna be saved, I'm gonna be a good person. That's not how it works. Like, we have to choose and we have to follow the covenant ourselves. And we want to carry on that legacy generation by generation, but every generation has to make that choice. And so it encourages me to not take for granted that my kids are gonna be Christian, but then also like try to help them understand that and really try to train them up in the Lord. But then also, like, it just reminded me how much I see that in my own heart, in my own life, on the small scale, that I'm like, man, this is so great. I'm gonna love God forever. I'm never gonna doubt him ever again because he just showed me himself and it was amazing. And then like the next time the smallest bad thing happens, I'm like, oh my gosh, God, where are you? Like, I know you did that great stuff in the past, but like, are you gonna do it again? What if you're not? What if you're done with me? What if you've abandoned me? What if you're different now? Or being really like passionate about God or like invested in my quiet time, and the next day I'm like, nah, I don't really want to do this. I don't know why I'm here. And just like being so swayed by emotions, like my heart is so easily led astray. And sometimes when I don't even realize it, like I think I'm doing okay, and then I'm suddenly like, whoa, I lost my passion somewhere along the way in like the last few days, and I don't even know where, I don't even know when, I don't even know why, but I know I need to get back. I need to reorient myself towards God, but I don't even know where I turned away. Just, we are so fickle and tend to be so faithless, but that just is in greater contrast to glorify even more like the faithfulness of God, that he's so good to us, he's so patient with us, and that he keeps his covenant, that even with all those evil kings, it would specifically say, but God didn't destroy them because he was unwilling to break his promise to David to keep one of his descendants on the throne forever. I was just like, what? That doesn't make sense. God should be punishing them. But God was keeping his end of the covenant. And it's just like so beautiful to see God in contrast to humans of like, look, this is the greater thing that we are worshiping. This is who we are giving our lives to because he's so much better than us. He's not just like us. He's not God made in our own image. He is so much better, so much more holy, so perfect and pure, and he is changing us to be like him. Wow, I want to be changed. I want to be different. I want to be like God. So that was interesting. And then the other thing, which kind of ties into the first thing that I was pointing out of like people feeling like God is very different in the Old Testament than in the New Testament. And I was saying part of that is just because I feel like he does intentionally slowly reveal his heart throughout history. But also these people are living under the old covenant. And he seems to be a different God now because we're living in a different covenant. Like he is not different. It's just that the covenant has changed. Back then, there were the laws to show us that we couldn't keep it, that we are so faithless, that we fall so short, that even if we try, we can't attain even like that much of a measure of the holiness that God calls us to. There's so much of a contrast between what is required to like be in relationship with God and be blessed by God and what we're actually capable of. And we think like, oh yes, God will serve you forever. We choose you. That's what the Israelites said. And then within that same generation or the next, they were turning away to these other gods. Like we think we're going to be so faithful and so great at this, and we're really not. We fall so short. I think it must have been so exhausting to even try to keep up with the sacrifices and the laws and like trying to measure my obedience and see if I was good enough or falling short. So there's that aspect of like now we live by grace and not by works because of what Jesus did, because now he extends a covenant not dependent on what we do, but dependent on what he has done for us. And we don't just say I can do whatever I want, but we look at the cost in the Old Testament of their faithlessness and we see what God has called us to and how righteously he punishes us when we fall so short. We see what God's standard is and how impossible it is to keep, but instead of being afraid, we live in this hope that we can be redeemed, we can be changed, that God is willing to forgive us when we repent, and that he is drawing us into a relationship with him and changing us to be the kind of people that can love him, that are capable of returning that love that he has offered freely to us. And another difference is in the Old Testament, it was like, do the right things with your life and your bodies, and you'll be blessed in your life and in your bodies. Like if you follow my commands, you will live longer. You will see peace. Your land will be prosperous. You'll have rest. And if you don't do what I say, if you don't follow these laws and you don't obey me and you don't worship me the way that you were created to, your enemies are going to come and kill you. It was all very much like about temporary promises and security. But now in the New Testament, living in a new covenant, it's different because now our security and the thing that we're working towards is set eternally. It's not just we're going to have a great little life here on earth. It's we're going to have a great eternity. We have hope for the rest of forever that is going to be beautiful and restored and redeemed, and we will truly like be at peace and be at rest and be restored, be in good physical health, be in good relationship with our neighbors, be in a right relationship with creation, that there will no longer be that curse on the ground, that when we toil we'll get thorns and thistles instead of what we were trying to produce, which is, it's so much better of a promise. It's so much better of a thing to look forward to. But in exchange, we're promised that, you know, this life isn't going to be easy. We're not always going to have the greatest things on earth and enjoy our life now. We're promised trials and persecutions and troubles, but Jesus says, take heart, because I've overcome the world. And so the people that preach like a prosperity gospel, that's not true. Like maybe it kind of looks like God had that kind of prosperity gospel with the Israelites in the past, but we're under a new covenant now. This is the rules that we live under now, but the promises are so much better and so much more eternal, and he promises to be with us in the troubles that we have right now. This is getting too long, I need to wrap this up. But those are kind of my thoughts on reading the Bible in a month. Flood of information through your brain. But it really did help to like get a bigger picture and just reflect on then some of these like bigger perspective things that I hadn't really thought about in quite a while or had never noticed before. And so I feel like it was very insightful and very encouraging for me. So if you're brave and you want to try that, I would recommend it. I do feel like it was definitely a beneficial experience, and it's just made me so much more in awe of God's holiness, but then also from recognizing how holy he is a lot more, I am all the more able to appreciate his grace and his kindness and his faithfulness when we completely do not deserve it. Thank you for watching, and goodbye until more interesting things happen.